Hi, Lou here to talk about the drafting mechanic in Nuts and Bolts this time. And it's the first time I think I've talked about a particular mechanic, and it's also a case where I'm going to talk about a mechanic that as far as I can recall, have never used, and I'll explain why and why many people do use it in their games. So what is the drafting mechanic? It's for games, whether tabletop or video, that usually involve more than one player. It's a way to give players more options than are available in a traditional card draw. In a sense, it makes the game easier to play, or at least less frustrating, and I'll talk about that later. There are two main versions of drafting: draw from a selection of face-up cards, or choose a card from a hand and pass the rest to the next player. So now I'll talk about those two. First, cards are laid out where all players can see them, and players take turns choosing cards which may or may not be replaced in the layout. Typically you have piles of cards, or you have a deck, and whenever a card is selected you choose another card from the deck and turn it face up and put it down in its place. So it's much like drawing from multiple piles of cards where you can see what's on top, and it can substitute for a traditional card draw as in the game Ticket to Ride. Now the second method, choose and pass we can call it, each player is dealt two or more cards. Often it'll be one card per player, or one more than the number of players. Each player chooses a card to keep and passes the remainder to the next player, let's say to the right. Then he takes the ones he or she receives from the player to the left and chooses one again and passes the remainder on, and so on until everyone discards the last card. In some games you might also be required to pay for each card you keep, either a standard cost or a cost specified on the card. Okay, why would you do this? Well, drafting gives players a stronger sense of control of the game as compared with drawing some cards from a deck. When you draw cards from a deck, you have no choice. You get what you get. When you draft, you have a choice. So there's an appearance that there are fewer constraints. Now, games are inherently a set of constraints, but I think modern players dislike constraints more than players did in the past. The whole zeitgeist of the 21st century is to at least give people the impression that they have fewer constraints and they have the freedom to do whatever they want. So that's becoming more common in games as well. Of course, also everyone is making a choice at the same time. They're not waiting as long on other players, although a deliberate player will still take longer to make a choice, and consequently the people will wait on him. On the other hand, it takes much more time than a straightforward draw. Now, I said this makes it easier to play, or at least less frustrating. You have more choices. And while having more choices can lead to their own questions of what to do, it's not very many choices. It's the ideal of a few choices. So the player feels less constrained because the player has more choices. Now, modern games especially are being designed to remove frustration. In video games, we've got to the point where many games are reward-based, kind of like party games, and there's almost no frustration. And modern games are also designed to remove constraints. And so drafting is a very modern mechanic in games. Now, what about time and expectations? As I say, I rarely use this mechanic. I'm not sure I ever have. It takes extra time, especially the second method of passing the cards around. I want players to play first, then draw, and think about the card they've drawn while the other players take their turns, hoping to give people something to do in their downtime and also reduce the amount of time people take to think when they have just drawn a card. So my sequence of play in a simple card game is usually play a card, then draw a card. Of course, when I grew up, I'm 66, players expected and were content with playing the cards they were dealt. That was a constraint, but everything about games is a constraint after all. Now, I had an interesting experience here. In one game I designed about 10 years ago, the draw deck is face up, and each player gets to choose whether to replace the top card with one in their hand or to pass, and then the player whose turn it is takes whatever's left and then plays a card. Now this worked fine 10 years ago, but when I tried it recently with college-age people, the players became impatient. Most of them didn't see enough value in having a chance to get the card and know what the other people took. Now, one of them did, but she's also somebody who's very thoughtful when she plays. The other players wanted to do something, and thinking often doesn't count as doing to modern hobby gamers, unlike, say, the situation 50 years ago. Now, I'm going to make one of my rare analogies to team sports. Taking one card to keep and passing the rest around, the second method I described, is a general manager's function. It's something like the classic U.S. sports pro draft of college players, but there you can choose any player not already chosen. And of course, this is probably where the name draft comes from, is the U.S. pro draft. I don't know. Playing what you're dealt without drafting is a coach's function in sports. We'd all like to coach Cristiano Ronaldo or Messi, but few can. You get the players you get, and you have to do the best with the players you've got. And of course, there are managers, especially in international soccer, who are famous for taking a set of star players and buying more players and then winning championships. But do those coaches or managers do a better job than somebody like, say, Sam Allardyce, who takes what he's got and makes the best out of it? That's open to question. Now, in European soccer, often the coach and the general manager are the same person. They're just called the manager. That's uncommon in American sports. It's becoming less common in European sports. But in that situation, the person can acquire the players as well as coach them. And that's what players do when they play a tabletop or video game that involves drafting. They're both acquiring their assets and then deciding what to do with them. So drafting takes time, but it gives many players a stronger sense of control, or at least of comfort. Thanks for listening.